Welcome to Season 2 of Feeding Families on the Eco-Parent Podcast Network. And don't forget to check out the new season of our other top podcast, Raising Kids Naturally. But before diving into this episode, a little shameless self-promotion from my son.
My dad started Eco-Parent when I was in the womb. Now it's pretty much the only parenting magazine still in print. If you like the podcast, you'll probably like the magazine too. You can subscribe online. You might also be interested in Eco-Parent's online courses, especially the kids nutrition and kids wellness courses. Stick around until the end of the episode and my dad will give you a discount code. Enjoy the show.
Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. CSNN is committed to supporting the growth of holistic nutrition professionals and other healthcare practitioners by offering continuing education workshops. The Advanced Holistic Nutrition Workshops help professionals get certified in the areas of holistic nutrition that benefit their practice and their clients. Certificate packages such as immune support and cognitive support are also available. Advanced Holistic Nutrition Workshops are available at select CSNN branches and through distance education. You can visit csnn.ca/programs/AHN to learn more about these Advanced Holistic Nutrition Workshops or follow the links in the show notes. The Feeding Families podcast is all about food and nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions to help you overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Welcome back, families. We have another amazing person here in our midst to speak with. Dr. Catherine Clinton is here. And how do I even introduce you? Dr. Catherine Clinton, we've known each other for a number of years at this point, and you were actually the second person I ever interviewed as a podcaster, back for round 2. And so here's the thing. Here's why I invited Dr. Catherine here, because our whole concept with this season, what I want to talk about is how we nourish our kids beyond just the food, all of the different ways we nourish our kids. And so I'll refer you back to episode 1 of season 2, where I talk about all of that. But one of the ways that we nourish our kids is through water. And I could, I was thinking, like, who could I have a conversation with about water? And you immediately popped into my mind. I'm like, I have to bring Catherine back for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. So essentially, what I want to talk about in this episode is water and how we use water to nourish our bodies and what it does for our kids. But you have a whole nother element to discuss, which is about quantum biology, quantum parenting, structured water, different qualities of water, like the metaphors of water. And so we're going to go there too. So I hope you're up for all that.
I'm excited. I'm so excited.
So first of all, welcome, Dr. Catherine Clinton. I mean, you have been a practicing naturopathic physician for 16 years, 17 years?
Yeah, 17.
A lot of years. You're also a mom, so you understand children. You understand living, in terms of like trying to get back to what is essential, how we nourish ourselves, how we nourish each other. Last time you came, we talked a lot about how messages flow through the body, messages of calm, messages of safety. We talked a lot about how we can learn from the microbiome, about the interconnections between our bodies and our food and all of the things. And I'm fascinated by the conversation. I think it can teach us a lot as parents to just open up the idea of connections. And so in the context of water, I want to start with that. Why is water, what's your opinion on why water is so important and so nourishing?
Right. That's such a good question. And it's such an overlooked question, right? So we're talking about parenting, but on the backdrop of that, we're talking about society and and how we look at medicine and healthcare and science, and water is virtually ignored. It is the backdrop of everything happening in the body, but like I said, it's ignored. It's just like we look at fish in an aquarium and we're like, look at those fish swimming in that water. And we don't recognize that we are bodies of water, right? We are, if we look at the body, we're over, like 70% water. And if we were to look at it molecularly and like count up all the molecules in the body, over 98% of us is water because those water molecules are so small, right? So we are really bodies of water, and water influences all of these processes that we talk about with our children and our parenting and ourselves, right? Our ability to regulate our emotions as parents, our ability to be present, our biological functions, our kids' behaviors, all of these things are happening in a sea of water. And so when we start to look at it that way, it really puts importance on just how do we hydrate? How do we tend to that body of water? And then if we take that out in circles, it's like, how do we form a relationship with water, not only in our daily life and our intake of water, but how do we form a relationship with the water in the world around us, right? When we take our kids to the ocean, to the rivers, here in Oregon, we're sort of like, I'm surrounded by creeks, right? So we go to the creek all the time in the spring and summer and fall. And what I notice, and so many parents notice, is that relationship with water that our children have, that natural body of water is so important for their nervous system. And it makes sense. I know you know this. I watch you and your family live on the, the rivers for part of the year. And so I know you know this. And it's, I mean, we can get really sciency about it and say that those bodies of water have negative ions that impact the nervous system, which is true. Bodies of water are grounding, right? That talk of grounding and earthing, where we can discharge some of that positive charge that is inflammatory and help regulate that negative charge in the body, which helps with inflammation and brain function and immune function and all those things. But also, there's this generational genetic relationship we evolved on this earth near waterways. I mean, that's really where we evolved as humans because you can't get far away from water, right? We need to breathe. That's the first one. The second one is water. We can live days without food, but water is essential to our existence. And that's how we evolved on this world. And so putting us back in that relationship with water, putting our kids back in that relationship of water, where their body knows, okay, here I am. This is where I'm supposed to be, regardless of all those negative ions and grounding and positive charge, negative charge, and all those sciencey terms, it's this relationship where our whole body says, okay, yep, I'm human, you're water, here we are again. And that's such a beautiful relationship that so many of us could really use cultivating in our family's life.
One of the things that I've read you write, I've heard you say, I've read you write, is that true health comes from relationships, and it's really a cornerstone of how you work, I think. And I believe that to be true too. And it's interesting that you talk about how kids are drawn to the water. I am quite fascinated by how all of the elements work in my family. Like we have a combination of earth, air, water, and fire in my family. And it's really interesting. We had a great time watching Avatar. Do you know the movie Avatar? where they talk we had a great time watching that together as a family and talking about the different elements and how the elements play out in our life and which ones are you drawn to and when, and it changes, and what do you think is dominant for you. And it's a fascinating conversation to have with your kids, to because it speaks to this relationship. The relationships isn't just about social relationships; it's about our relationship with the environment that's around us, and how we get energy from that, how we give energy to that. It's a very powerful conversation, which I think is what you're getting at here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and like you said, relationships, we say that and we immediately go to, "Oh, my kids' social relationships, and how do we navigate bullying and the social scene and screens and tech and social media," and, all of the human relationships, which of course are important. But one of the beautiful things about cultivating a relationship as a family, helping your children cultivate a relationship with the natural world is those things aren't governed by bullies and trends and social media. Those are millennia old relationships that we've always had that bring such an ease and sense of safety and belonging. As a person, have suffered from anxiety for such a long time. I think it's genetically, generationally sort of passed down, and also a product of some of my early childhood experiences. And for me, as a person who has suffered with anxiety, to find safety and belonging in the waterways, in creeks, in the ocean, in the rising of the sun, in the tree that's growing outside, those bring a sense that's different than my social relationships, right? And this is not to knock social relationships because they are absolutely important. Our family relationships are important, but there's a different relationship, right? It's like that grandmother that has no judgment, right? You just go and give them a hug, and they're always there. It's that sense of unconditional love. There's nothing that's going to change the way that ocean greets you or that lake greets you or that tree. And that's one of the beautiful things that we can provide to our children. I remember my parents kind of dragging me into the woods or to the ocean. It was like, and then that instilled this deep love that I hope to pass on to my children. My teen the other day, after long days of online learning, said, "Can we go for a hike? We need to go for a hike." And it's like, "Oh, is that
That's a
music?"
parenting win. It's very consistent and dependable, we do a lot of canoe trips with our kids, and it's one of those things that I'm so grateful that we have done this consistently with them, because it's very predictably unpredictable in a sense. It's like, that when it's raining you're going to get cold, you're going to have it's very, I don't know, our and rivers have taught us a lot. But it's that dependence, it's that predictability and dependability, I think, that really calms the nervous system. Because we know that about social relationships too, right? As a parent, the more consistent and dependable you are, that is sending messages of common safety to your kids as we co-regulate. And so Mother Earth is doing that for us as well. One of the things that I talk about, in my core nourishment needs that I introduce in episode 1, I talk about breath and water, or air and water, as being in the same category, and that confuses a lot of people because they're very different. But I like to group, clean air and clean water together, because I see them as the fluids that keep everything going. I mean, obviously air is not a fluid, but the fluidity of it, of breath, keeps things moving, and water keeps things moving. And when we don't have those, or they're not sufficient, or they're not clean, then we get stuck and whether that's stuck in an illness, or stuck in a mood, or stuck in a behavior, a pattern, or what have you. So let's talk about that a little bit, just in terms of what water does in our bodies?
Absolutely. Well, let's take it from just the most basic understanding. If we don't have adequate levels of hydration, then our proteins can't fold. And what does that mean? So we have a cell, right? And it's a bilipid membrane, two layers of fat. And embedded in that membrane are proteins, right? We can kind of visualize this like a beaded bracelet, right? The bilipid membrane are little beads, and then the big beads are those proteins, and they go outside of the cell to pick up signals and bring them inside of the cell. So they actually extend in both directions. They go outside of the cell and into the cell. And those proteins are really the receivers of information, whether that is sensory information, whether that's emotional information. We can say the same things about our proteins from an enzymatic point of view, right? These little enzymes that catalyze all of these biological functions. Without enzymes and the proteins that do them, we wouldn't have life. That's really, really foundational. I mean, and that goes for every living system on Earth, right? And us included. And so if those proteins aren't hydrated, if they are dry and stiff and can't move to create the function that we need for that action, whatever it might be, then that doesn't happen, right? That hydration, that saying water is life is so very true, because without that hydration, those proteins can't fold and move and create the biological action that we need in the body. So on a very basic level, we have to have that water within us. And that's why we see that it's a huge need, right? We can't go that long without hydration, right? It's something that is absolutely necessary for our body. And so we have that level of requirement in the body for water to create the backdrop of all these biological functions. And so from that understanding, I mean, we can go so many places.
Well, it's I think as a parent, right? Let's come down to like day-to-day living and trying to parent our kids. I find that really comforting to know, because it is so foundational that when you can't get your kid to eat well, when they're talking back to you, or they're withdrawing, or they're staying up too late on their device, or all of these things that we have to tackle, getting them to drink more water might be a starting place. And when you're doing that, you're actually shifting the signaling inside their body without them really even knowing it. So I don't know. I find when we can find these things that are big bang for our energetic buck, so to speak. And I'm not saying it's easy to get kids to drink water. Sometimes that's not the place to start, because they refuse it, and so we can find other places to start. But it's one of those pieces that is so big picture and so fundamental that, if that's the one thing that you have bandwidth to start doing, consider that might be a place to start to improve your child's health. And in terms of the amount, I mean, gosh, the amounts vary so much with activity level, where you live, age, weight. So we won't really get into there, into that so much, because it's so dependent on all kinds of things. But do you have any general comments about quality and quantity of water when it comes to kiddos?
Yeah, I do. And like you said, it is so individual on, environment. What's the temperature like? What season are you in? What's your activity level? How much that child is sweating and exerting, and their weight, and all of that is so individual. But we can make some really great generalizations. And the first one, I think, is the idea that I have to hand this huge glass of water to my child and they have to guzzle it down, right? That's just like, oh, easy, right? So to understand that our hydration actually isn't from that, of course we can get hydrated in that way, but we have to remember some of that basic, um, primary school science of osmosis. So making sure that our water or our hydration source has minerals in it is a wonderful way to make sure that that water is getting intercellularly into the matrix so that those proteins are hydrated. And that can look like so many different things. That can look like mineral water. That can look like fruits and vegetables, right? Your kid doesn't like water. What about an apple? What about a carrot? What about some grapes, some celery? I mean, all of those things are wonderfully hydrating and they have the minerals in them to help drive that water into the body, right? So it doesn't have to be this kind of, stand over the child with the 16 ounces of plain water while they guzzle it down sort of obstacle. It can look like so many different things. Hydration can come from our foods, right? I love in the winter, my kids drink less water than they do in the summertime. They're much more thirsty and ready to drink a cool beverage in the summer. But in the winter, we do a lot of stews and soups that allow for hydration. I know lots of families do smoothies, right? These are wonderful ways to hydrate that take us away from that big glass of water. And thinking about hydration as a bigger picture. So, how hydrating is your child's diet? Is it a bunch of crackers and cheese and it doesn't have any fruits and vegetables that can be more hydrating? That is something that can really help kind of shift that perspective that isn't that glass of water, right?
Are you looking for a hands-on, nature-based education that lets students experience their learning on multiple levels? For more than 45 years, Oak Meadow has been supporting families as a leader and pioneer in homeschooling and distance education, creating rewarding educational experiences that fit your family's unique needs and goals. Their secular, book-based curriculum can be used independently by homeschoolers or through enrollment in their teacher-supported distance learning school. Discover the high-quality, child-centered learning materials you need to give your student a happy, harmonious educational experience at oakmeadow.com.
It's fascinating to me how often I come across kids who are not thirsty and just won't drink. And I've experienced that myself as well. And I think of it, I mean, in my experience, it's kind of like the crusty sponge, that's been sitting next to your sink forever. And you try to hydrate it and the water just kind of falls right off of it. And I've experienced that as well. The more dehydrated I am, the more I pee it out. And I have had a wonky relationship with hydration over the years. But as I hydrate myself, I start to pee less and I start to feel more hydrated. And it is that kind of thing. And there are kids who just do not feel thirsty. And so I love this idea of broadening the concept of how we can hydrate them. And as we do, you might find, as we bring in the minerals, as we bring in the liquids in other forms, like water in other forms, and I bet actually we could add in the whole relationship piece, and if you have access to external water and introducing them to that space, I think you will find that their palate opens up a little bit. Do you want to say anything about that? Do you notice that, or can you give insight into why that might happen?
I absolutely think that crusty sponge analogy is perfect, right? I mean, that's um, really a perfect analogy for what's happening because we can't take in that water and it goes back to that mineralization, right? If we're not hydrated, we probably don't have adequate minerals in the body. And that's not helping us pull that water in. And it's just, like you said, that crusty sponge that's not pulling in water. And so what you have is these small steps to kind of move that crusty sponge back into the circulation of the sink, right? And bit by bit, that hydration, the better quality hydration allows for more absorption, right? And that's really looking at the minerals. And there's so many different ways. We talked about fruits and vegetables and soups and smoothies. We love teas, and having the children pick out the teas has been really helpful. And it's funny how my kids have opposite tastes in teas, right? One really loves gingery, minty, kind of teas. The other one is really like a rooibos chai. So it's, letting people explore that. We are really fortunate to have Mountain Rose Herbs here, which is a wonderful herb shop that has bulk herbs. So they can go make their own tea formula. They can put some roses in and some mint leaves and getting your kids involved in that hydration can be really, really helpful, as you talk about all the time. Getting your kids involved in that eating routine and that ownership can really help them kind of become much more accepting of what's going on, rather than just being handed a glass of something or a plate of something, right? That getting them involved.
I love teas as well, and teas don't need to be warm either. They can be cold, they can be iced, they can be warm, they can be hot. You can mix them into soups to give a different flavor. I mean, there's so much there, and then you're giving minerals as well, and you're giving a little bit of nourishment, vitamins, as well. So that can be really lovely for kids who don't like tea. I actually do that sometimes too. When I slip, I have this tendency to slip into the I'm not drinking any water, and I'll do that. I'll make a big mason jar of tea and keep it in the fridge and make sure that I drink that for myself as well. Can we just dip our foot into the quantum for a second? Because I am fascinated with it. I don't quite understand it, but you have a very interesting perspective on quantum biology and parenting from a quantum perspective. And I think it relates because it's all about relationship and it's all about, energy. So if we can keep it sort of fairly connected to fluids and water, what is quantum biology and what do you mean by quantum parenting?
That's a great question, right? Because that's such a big word, or an idea. Like, we've heard of quantum physics, we've heard of biology, but the marriage of the two is something that's really quite different. And what I'm talking about with quantum biology is the idea of how these small pieces in our biology play out, how the flow of electrons, how the flow of protons, how photons of light, how these little subatomic interactions really give rise to these bigger things that we see: behavioral issues, learning issues, all of these different things that we worry about and talk about with our kids. We can look at a much deeper understanding than chemical and mechanical models, which of course exist. I mean, quantum biology doesn't negate that a chemical has this impact on the body or this food has this impact. What it does is it says that there is this sea of quantum interaction. And what that means is how these subatomic pieces in our body are influenced by these really small subatomic pieces or triggers of electricity and light, water, sound, all these different things, and how that plays out in the body. And so when we're talking about quantum parenting, we're talking about the effects of light, we're talking about the effects of sound, we're talking about the effects of electricity and conduction of electrons, through so many different ways, right? We talked a little bit about grounding, but mitochondrial function and the flow of electrons and protons in the body is huge when it comes to anyone's biology, including our kids. And one of the most beautiful pieces, I think, about quantum parenting is this idea of coherence, and this idea of coherence being two or more pieces working on the same level, working at the same frequency. And so when we are looking at our children as something that we want to become coherent with, as something we want to work at the same frequency with, we start to see things on a different level, right? This child that is acting out and, not talking back, and this friction we have, we can kind of see that as a completely different way of communicating, this way of looking at coherence in the body and how we can grab their frequency information is so important when it comes to the overall backdrop of our parenting and what that means and how we get across our emotions and our feelings. It's a really beautiful idea. It's like two tuning forks, right? If I strike one tuning fork and the other one picks up that tune and sings in the same frequency, we are resonant beings as humans. We can do that. We can become coherent with the seasons, with the sun, with the weather, with our children. And so I think that's one of the most beautiful pieces about quantum parenting for me as a parent.
I have the image of the crusty sponge in my mind again. You know, that sometimes our kids can seem like the crusty sponge and like we're saying things and we're doing things and they're not hearing us, they're not listening, and they're not absorbing our energy, or they're actually repelling our energy. And what you're just describing with coherence is really, how do we get into their cellular matrix? How do we get into them allowing us in? How can we allow them to let us in? How can we get into their crusty spongeness? I love I'm loving that analogy. I'm going to keep using it. Um, but right, understanding their cellular matrix, understanding the signaling inside them and around them to make all of that work together. I've got lots of images flowing in my mind when you say quantum parenting. I really look forward to learning more about that from you on a very cellular level, right? Because it gets into really the nitty-gritty of what is informing our bodies, what is informing our health, and how we interact with our environment.
It really does. It really does because, I mean, not to get too sciency, but the whole emerging field of quantum biology kind of came on this research out of UC Berkeley and these amazing researchers, Greg Engel and Graham Fleming, and they were looking at how a cell picks up a photon and takes it to the photosynthetic reaction center for photosynthesis to occur. And they found that there are quantum phenomenon happening in the cell to make it happen so fast, right? We have trillions and trillions of cells in the body, and each one of those cells is creating hundred thousands of tasks each second. Sometimes it's researchers posit this at over 1 million tasks each second. And that just is really impossible with this floating keys bumping into receptors and this random collision model, right? And that's what they found. They found that quantum effects like tunneling were happening where these little particles can go through obstacles. But what was really amazing, in my opinion, was that the whole backdrop of this was this quantum coherence. So the proteins in the cell were vibrating in a way that guided this photon on its fastest path. They were almost like, cheerleaders on the side of a marathon, the crowd saying, keep going. We know it's really hard, but keep going. That encouragement was what the researchers called a quantum beat, but it's really termed quantum coherence, that idea of being in the same frequency and using that frequency for better outcomes. And so if we translate that to parenting and how we can be on the same frequency as our children and use that for better outcomes, it just becomes a beautiful lesson. And that coherence can look like regulating ourselves, right? Like the Heart Math Institute has done incredible research on how we as parents, when we can get in this state of presence or coherence, when we can take some deep breaths, when we can go into that heart area and think of gratitude or joy or something that brings awe, when we get in that state of heart coherence, then we can actually affect the people around us, right? That affects our children as well. And this is the reason why I think coherence and emotional coherence is really important as parents. So when I'm having a bad day and my little 9-year-old says to me, like, "Are you okay, Mom?" I don't say, "Yeah, I'm okay. Everything's okay," because that's being out of coherence. She knows something's not okay. Our kids know. They know even before we speak, right? They can feel that. They know. So when I say to her, no, everything's fine, then it invalidates not only her emotional perception of what's happening, her own sense of what's real in the world, but it degrades that coherence, right? Instead, if I say, "Yeah, I'm having a moment here, I'm really frustrated or sad or whatever the emotion might be, and I'm going to take a second. I'm going to go take a bath. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to do whatever regulatory measures we do as parents to make it better." That creates a completely different relationship. It creates a relationship where the child is validated. Oh, I knew something was wrong. Then they see mom is human and she has these emotions and she can travel through them, right? She doesn't have to be this, everything's fine, crying over the making meal prep, right? That's not what we want. We want this coherent frequency that flows. And it doesn't mean that we need to be love and light. It doesn't mean that we need to be regulated at all times and perfect at all times. No, it means that we need to be real. We need to be human. And we need to not only display that for our children and show them how that's done, but we need to make space for them to have those big emotions too. When they are working through that anger and that frustration and that sorrow, that sorrow of navigating the social systems, all of those different things. If we can make space for them to regulate and be that coherent parent that allows for that space, that tuning fork that vibrate on the same level. And this doesn't mean that when we're going through hard times they need to, or when they're angry we need to match that. It means we provide that safe harbor so that that can flow, right? That flowing, like you talked about air and water and flowing, emotion and energy, that flow of emotion is so important. And so I think that coherence really brings up this idea of how we walk with our children and our emotions, both our emotions, their emotions. And I think it's really foundational because, we talk about so many higher level pieces of nutrition and supplements and exercise and all these things that are absolutely wonderful, very impactful on our family life, on our children's health. But if there's not that backdrop of coherence and safety, then digestion isn't working right. Our brains aren't working right. I mean, there's a list there that's not working at the right vibration for all those wonderful tools to fit into place and be of service. So I love talking about quantum coherence when it comes to parenting.
Again, I find it very comforting to be like, you know what? We have trillions of allies in the gut. We have trillions of allies floating around as quantum particles. Like we don't have to do this ourselves. And I love everything about what you said about, allowing for coherence and allowing for our children to notice that they have an inner knowing about things, because we often, as parents, we need to be the rock. We need to be the, I gotcha. I'm okay. We need, because we think everything's going to fall apart if we're not okay. And the only thing that's going to fall apart when we do that is ourselves. Right. And I think this messaging to our kids also that no, 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 I got it. When they actually know something is wrong, I hope people like rewind and listen to that over and over again. It's very, very important. It makes me come back to water, actually. It makes me think of water again as what keeps things flowing, what keeps things moving. And maybe next time I'm not okay, I might drink a glass of water. I mean, water, it's going to help things move, help me move through my mood, help me move through my moment, or tea. As the case may be, right? It's almost intuitive, right? When we're having a moment, sitting down for a cup of tea sounds kind of comforting, right? Maybe there's a little quantum level there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I know that, this is sort of a huge topic, but water has it's a dipole, meaning that it has in one molecule of water, it has a positive and a negative side, and that's what makes it so reactive. That's why water is that universal solvent, right? Because it can really react with so many different things, and that polarity allows it to have certain effects on the subatomic level. And so it's just a beautiful sort of antenna, receiver of information. And we talked about how it lines the proteins in the body and the enzymes and how it's so vital for health. And one of the pieces we didn't talk about was because of this quantum communication that's happening that water allows for. It's really such an amazing, fascinating part of our world and our body that's so under-recognized. So I would definitely say that there's something quantum happening when we're hydrated, when we have adequate water, and it's really acting as this receiver and emitter of information. It's really absolutely so fascinating and so far from what we learned in school, H2O, a glass of H2O, and you drink that. It's really the amazing, incredible substance that really allows for life in general.
This is why I wanted you to be the one to talk about water, because it's more like, drink your 4 glasses a day and, sit there, make sure your kids are drinking so that they poop well. And like all that is true. But, I wanted to kind of blow open the conversation a little bit to help you understand that water actually is your ally in parenting, and how some different ways where we can use it strategically, whether that's through food, whether that's through water or tea or rivers or creeks. It's very multifaceted, but it is a core nourishment need. It is a non-negotiable in our lives. As you say, we've evolved near water, and I hope we can all develop a healthy respect for that. How can people learn more from you? You have so much to offer. What's the best way for people to learn from you?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm Dr. Catherine Clinton everywhere. I didn't get really creative with that. My website is Dr. Catherine Clinton. My social media handles, whether that's Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, are Dr. Catherine Clinton. And I love sharing this information. So find me there. I'm sharing this information all the time and would love to continue the conversation.
And there will be a forthcoming book. It is in the works, and we're manifesting it as we speak. And so look for it as it evolves. But this is amazing. Thank you so much for coming and for sharing all your wisdom.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on and doing what you do with families and parents and children. It's so important. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you feel called to, share it with another family who needs to hear it. There are more tools from me at jesssherman.com/learn and jesssherman.com/membership, alongside all the great resources you'll find at EcoParent. Things are changing for kids, and the more we come together in conversation as parents, the more we can find ease and joy as we raise the next generation together. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, keep at it. You have the most important job in the world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. If you think this podcast is great, our host, Jess Sherman, has condensed everything you need to know to nourish your family into a truly fantastic 7-hour video course. You can learn more at ecoparent.ca/learn. It will change the way you think about feeding your family. You might also be interested in our Kids Wellness course, taught by Dr. Leslie Solomonian. As a thank you for listening, I'd like to offer you a 15% discount on any one of our online courses or any subscription to EcoParent magazine. Just head on over to ecoparent.ca, hit the Eco Shop button in the navigation bar, and use code FEEDING15 at checkout. All caps, no spaces, that's FEEDING15. Till next time.